Greetings, friends, and welcome back to the Musings from the Mount podcast. I'm your host, Joseph Carenza. What stands between you and your highest spiritual potential? In esoteric tradition, it's called the dweller on the threshold, or the sum total of all of our unresolved past, our fears, and our limitations. Today, on Musings from the Mount, Michael Lindfield and I explore this powerful guardian that each spiritual seeker must face. Drawing from Alice Bailey's Ponder on This and connecting it to modern concepts like shadow work and trauma healing, we'll discover why facing our dweller might be the most important step in our spiritual journey. Get ready to explore what it truly means to face yourself at the gates of transformation. And if you enjoy this podcast, please consider going to meditationmount.org and donating. Your donation helps us to bring you this podcast as well as all the other programs the Mount produces, both today and in the future. We are incredibly grateful and honored by your support. And now back to the podcast and the dweller on the threshold. When we consider the dweller on the threshold, it mentions also the trials of Scorpio, and so I think we'll touch on that. But a concept that is very prevalent today is, comes from Jung, the idea of shadow work and the shadow self. And we think about the dweller as this concept of all of our, the trials and tribulations, all of our baggage, all of our, the things that we still need to work on. So I'm trying to think of ways of how we can make the dweller on the threshold this concept, which can be a little daunting, relevant to someone who maybe is a spiritual person but doesn't know the dogma, doesn't know the text. So as we jump into it, I want to kind of try to keep that in mind. Like, what is this concept of the dweller on the threshold, and how can I make that relevant for someone that's listening that has no idea what we're talking about?
Right.
And for me, like, this really brought up a lot of interesting stuff, because it turns out my entire life is about the dweller on the threshold. It's like the more you read about this, the more you realize this is the whole thing. Like, this is the struggle. This is what if you're on a spiritual path, if you're at all mindful, if you're all working yourself. A concept that's very popular now is the idea of processing trauma and working through generational trauma. And sometimes we relate that to kind of like a karmic debt or a karmic balance that we have to reconcile. And I think that's something that people can really grasp onto, this idea of, I have all this unprocessed trauma I need to work on. Well, if you want to get to the next level in a video game, you have to beat this level. Well, and yes. I don't want to look at it like a competition, but you have to go through and process and deal with this stuff. And so the dweller on the threshold, for lack of a better kind of image, it sits on the precipice and says, none shall pass until you're ready.
Exactly. Thank you, Joey. Well, let's follow the format that we did last week, is that we will read some of the original text from the Alice Bailey writings from the master DK, the Tibetan. And then after we've read a couple of paragraphs or a half a paragraph, we will unpack it, make sense of it ourselves, and then any personal anecdotes that we can add. Because you're absolutely right. We have to bring this into a daily reality so that meeting the dweller on the threshold isn't some far-removed image of a distant spiritual journey. It's the daily life. It is redeeming the trauma. It is healing from that. It's all of that. I remember when I first encountered the concept, I had a very simplistic understanding of the shadow. I called it the shadow, and then it was the dweller. The shadow was the sum total of all the unredeemed, unaccepted, and unloved aspects of myself.
Right, yeah.
And even though that's true, there's more to it. And that's why I want to use the words that the master DK gave to Alice Bailey to publish into the world so that we would have a better understanding of it.
Let's get into that.
So let me just begin by reading. And we're reading from this book called Ponder on This, which is a compilation of the writings of Alice Bailey, and it goes theme by theme. So you can open it at any page and dive in. So this one is called The Dweller on the Threshold. And once again, the pronouns will probably be him and his, and rather than they and her. And so please, our apologies for the language that was used then that may not be relevant now, but we're going to use it because that's how it was written, but we're going to hold it in the way that we hold it now with gender equality. The dweller on the threshold is usually regarded as presenting the final test of man's courage and as being in the nature of a gigantic thought form or factor which has to be dissipated prior to taking initiation. Just what this thought form is, few people know, but their definition includes the idea of a huge elemental form which bars the way to the sacred portal, or the idea of a fabricated form constructed sometimes by the disciple's master to test his sincerity. Some regard it as the sum total of a man's faults, his evil nature, which hinders him being recognized as fit to tread the path of holiness. None of these definitions, however, give a true idea of the reality. So it's basically saying what we've just said,
right.
and he's saying, yes, but there's more. So let's go back, because this is something that I had, of this huge elemental form. In fact, I've used an image which I drew many years ago of this big black elemental being, huge, like a giant,
right.
knocking on somebody's door, and the person opens the door and says, "My God, who are you?" Mm-hmm. And the being says, "I'm all your unloved, unaccepted parts. It's cold and lonely out here. Let me in."
Yeah.
Now, the inspiration for that came from a cartoon I saw in a men's magazine.
Right.
Which the big elemental blob knocking on the door was, "Hi, Mr. Jones. I'm the 300 pounds of meat you consumed last year. I've come to get your payment."
Right.
And so that's said, well, basically chicken's coming home to roost again, Joey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a theme that continues throughout this podcast series.
Well, the reason it happens is because with power comes responsibility. Mm-hmm. Whatever we create, we're responsible for its creation and the duration of its life. Mm-hmm. So if we set in motion something that is not so pleasant for ourselves and others, it will continue to create unpleasantness until we have dissolved that thought form.
Mm-hmm. Which is an interesting concept because we're so in line. There's so much about our current kind of state of culture that is avoidant of anything uncomfortable. And that is something to this journey. When you go on this spiritual journey, when you're ready to try to ascend to a higher spiritual awareness, it is not without some sense of unpleasantness. You have to deal with this accounting.
Well, the unpleasantness is just the dissonance in the field that still does not allow you to be at peace.
Yeah.
And we used this phrase from Agni Yoga before, that comfort is the cemetery of the spirit. Mm-hmm. Now, comfort, it doesn't mean you can't feel good and, live a good life. It means you can't check out and just sort of hang out in these sort of, if you like, clouds of comfort, like pillows of comfort.
There's a difference between the pursuit of comfort and the pursuit of truth. Because truth is uncomfortable, but it makes you stronger. And it actually leads to a different kind of spiritual comfort.
Well, it's uncomfortable because it doesn't resonate with the truth of who we are. We went to this definition before. Truth and justice are the same thing. To be just is to be true. And if you're out of true, you are uncomfortable. You're out of true, and you need an adjustment.
Right.
Adjust towards the true. Mm-hmm. So you true it in.
Yeah.
Mechanically as an engineer, you know what it means to bring something into true.
Right.
Or even as a musician with sound recording. Mm-hmm. So our task is to bring ourselves into a state of trueness, of justice, which means alignment.
Right.
And everything out of alignment creates distortion, creates pain. This is what we said before. The pedagogical approach of Earth is through pain and suffering. It sort of nudges us to this narrow path.
Mm-hmm.
And the narrow path is the path that leads between the two great pairs of opposites. We talked about that in Libra.
Right.
And in the end, you walk this razor's edge path of discipleship. And the further along you get, the more aware you become.
Yeah.
It becomes so narrow that it is called the razor's edge path.
Mm-hmm.
And there is absolutely no deviation. There is no slack.
Mm-hmm.
So there is no adjustment needed because you're asked to live a true life.
Yeah.
And if you fall off that wagon...
Yeah, that's a treacherous idea. Yeah, and that's also a kind of a higher concept too. In that once you've done a lot of preparation, once you get to that point, but really, like, one of the main functions of this concept, if you look at it like a process, is it tests your readiness for transformation. You don't, it's like you don't go run a marathon without doing some warm up. Like you
absolutely.
That's when they always tell you. Before starting an exercise regimen, check with your doctor to make sure that you're ready to go. This is kind of, you're checking in. You're checking in to make sure that you're ready to do this process. And it's going to remind you, it's going to bring up this stuff. And
exactly, Joey. It's a lovely way of putting it, because all the tests are simply to build our capacity.
Mm-hmm.
Our capacity to do what? The capacity to live the truth of who we are.
Right.
And when we live the truth of who we are automatically in service of life.
Yeah.
It's like, duh, it's the path of service.
Right. And there is that resistance too. It's taking your temperature, it's getting all your gauges and seeing where you are. Are you resistant to change? Are you still holding on to things? And that's one thing as humans we love to do. We love to hold on. We love to wallow in our trauma and wear it like a shroud.
Well, I like the way you phrase that, because you read the gauges and it gives you a reading without blame or judgment.
Right. That's important.
So let's read a couple of more sentences from DK. The dweller on the threshold is illusion, glamour, maya, as realized by the physical brain and recognized as that which must be overcome. It is the bewildering thought form with which the disciple is confronted when he seeks to pierce through the accumulated glamour of the ages and find his true home in the place of light. That sort of sums up what you've just been saying and I've just been saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's piercing the veils of illusion,
right,
the mists of Maya. We talked last time about the astral plane. And the astral plane, by its very nature, is full of fog. And where does this fog come from? From a psychic level, you could say that it's the emotional waters, when they combine with the fires of the lower mind, they create a fog. Just as when you have water and heat and moisture, you'll get fog coming in.
Right.
Whether that's the fog that's rolling in as a maritime layer off the Pacific coast here to Southern California, or whether if you live in a city with a river, the temperature difference and the moisture create fog. And what we have to do is to burn the fog off with the higher fire, the fire of love, the fire of the soul, burn it off with the light of the soul. And so the dweller is living in the mists of Maya.
Mm.
Now, this next paragraph actually touches on something that you mentioned at the beginning. The dweller on the threshold, always present, swings, however, into activity only on the path of discipleship, when the aspirant becomes occultly aware of himself, of the conditions induced within him as a result of his interior illusion, his astral glamour, and the Maya surrounding his entire life.
Mm.
So it's always present, but we call it forth by stepping on the path.
Mm-hmm.
When we become occultly aware of ourselves, that simply means knowing ourselves to be essentially divine. knowing ourselves to be the incarnated agents of the soul. Therefore, our task in life is not survival. It's the building of an incarnated instrument that can do justice to the note of the soul.
Yeah, I like that idea, and it's important not to view this as like an external enemy. This is something it's omnipresent, always waiting there for you whenever you're ready to take this
and
step.
I think that you, if you like, is one big illusion, is that who are you to block my path? It's some evil presence blocking me, and get thee hence, Satan, kind of thing. No, it's not.
No.
The only thing blocking us is our own self.
Right.
The only thing stopping me from understanding the cosmos firsthand is my level of consciousness. How do I grow my level of consciousness? Through this step-by-step unfolding and merging of the parts of myself, like personality and soul.
Yeah.
And we've talked about there are two fusions in the human experience. The first fusion is when the soul and the personality start to merge and relate. That opens the heart. And then you have the integrated soul and personality. Then now is a receptacle for the higher fire of the monad, which can't touch down unless it has a fireplace. So the fireplace to house the fire of the monad is the hearth of the second fusion. So the second fusion is when my soul-infused personality merges and dances with the monad. So we're always, just as you said, we're always preparing the instrument for the next dispensation, the next revelation. And so the dweller really says, oh, okay, here you are. It's always been waiting there for us.
Yeah, that's been my experience. It's always just been patiently waiting, like, are you ready? Okay, stop hitting yourself.
So now you're aware of yourself. You can face yourself.
Yeah, that's been my experience.
So let's carry on reading this, and then stopping, and then we can add our own little anecdotes. Being now an integrated personality, and no one is disciple, my brother, unless he is mental as well as emotional, which is a point the devotee oft forgets. These three conditions, with the preponderance of the effect in one or other of the bodies, are seen as a whole, and to this whole the term dweller on the threshold is applied. It is in reality a vitalized thought form, embodying mental force, astral force, and vital energy. So you could say that the dweller on the threshold is a living presence, is a living being. It's been given life by us because everything that we've imbued with our thoughts and with our life energy, we've brought it alive. Energy follows thought. We've created this Frankenstein's monster.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's an interesting way to look at it, and because it's unique to each person, and through your experience, I mean that's been my experience. Is that it's all of those unredeemed, unresolved issues, thoughts, feelings. Man, they're all right there, and anyone can do that. You feel them; they're always sitting there, right on your shoulder,
and it's not a list of these things.
Right.
It's an embodiment of these things. That's the difference, Joey.
Yeah.
If we were saying, oh, here's a list of the things you've got to work on. No, this list is an embodied reality. And the dweller then, because every time we create, we draw upon elemental substance and matter to clothe it in form. So you could say the dweller on the threshold is an elemental embodiment, an outpicturing of all that still remains to be redeemed inside of us. So it is an elemental presence. And these elemental presences can be very powerful. They can be shocking to the system. And you think, my God, I'm under attack. Somebody's trying to kill me. No. The darkness I see in front of me is my own unknowing. It's the black light of my own ignorance.
Right. Yeah, that's a very good way to put it. Yeah.
So when you boil it down, it is very simple. we are living in a time where we as a human species are residing on the astral plane. That's because you reside wherever your consciousness lives. Now, if we want to move, we raise our consciousness. For instance, it's said the masters of wisdom, the postgraduate humans, and the Tibetan is one of these masters, they used to live on the higher mental plane. And the teaching says about 100 years ago, they moved house. They moved it to the Buddhic plane. They now live on the Buddhic plane.
Right.
Why? Because they raised their collective frequency. And therefore, you automatically live where you reside in frequency. So the masters of wisdom now live on the Buddhic plane, the plane of love, wisdom, the intuitive plane. And we, humanity, we're going to move house.
Yeah, hopefully.
It doesn't mean we're going to move to a gated community somewhere and wall ourselves off from. It simply means we live where we resonate. When we shift our vibration and we overcome the tests of the dweller, we raise our frequency, and therefore, like attracts like, and we find ourselves living in a new vibrational space. Ah, man. This is where it gets interesting. The dweller on the threshold, to quote the Tibetan, does not emerge out of the fog of illusion and glamour until the disciple is nearing the gates of life. Only when he can catch dim glimpses of the portal of initiation and occasional flash of light from the angel of the presence, who stands waiting beside the door, can he come to grips with the principle of duality, which is embodied for him in the dweller and the angel. Then he goes on to say, as yet my words embody for you symbolically a future condition and event. The day will surely come, however, when you will stand in full awareness between these two symbols of the pairs of opposites, with the angel on the right and the dweller on the left. And he ends, may strength then be given to you to drive straight forward between these two opponents who have for long ages waged warfare in the field of your life, so you may enter into the presence where the two are seen as one and naught is known but life and deity. I mean, this is a powerful vision.
Yeah. That passage particularly was one that was relevant and striking to me, including the idea of that when you're on the sort of the gates of life, that like almost like this is all just training. This isn't actually real life. We're training to live real life.
Well, just because we're still in the worlds of illusion.
Yeah. And then you have to, in order to have that sort of responsibility, to have that, to get the keys to that car, you have to go through all this and redeem all this stuff. And then it really, that kind of brought that home, that whole idea of like, well, what's the point of doing all this work? What's the point of, why are we doing this?
So that God can be revealed in us and through us.
Right. Yeah.
That's the whole object, as far as I understand it, in very simplistic terms, of why the universe was created. A friend of mine, an Australian musician, many years ago in the 70s when he was living at Finhorn, he wrote many songs. One of them was this line that said, God made the world so he could touch himself. And it's just like, that's the self-realization can only happen when we have a first-hand experience. And we are the instrument that will have that first-hand experience. We are the fractal. We are the many that is seeking to recreate unity, oneness. And when we approach the gates of life, when we're ready now to enter the next door, it's like your video game, when you're ready to enter the next level,
right?
Then you're faced with these two beings, the angel of the presence and the dweller. The angel stands on the right, the dweller on the left. They're like the two pillars of the portal. So is one better than the other? No. The duality is the field of tension through which we have to pass on the upper path. Let us choose the way that leads between the two great lines of opposites, which is the motto of Libra. We choose that higher path, which then is that synthetic point that overcomes the duality. Because what we find when we go through the gates of life is the presence of deity, the presence. What stands at the threshold is the dweller and the angel of the presence. The angel, for me, would be the sum total of all the petals of my soul that I've opened. It's a representation of the presence. It isn't the presence itself. Yeah. Just as we said before, the fire of the monad will burn a hole through anything except a hearth made out of love, made out of the fusion of the soul and personality in perfect union.
Right. That's an important concept.
These are deeply occult statements that actually have to do with our daily life, Joey.
Yeah, I think that's what's interesting to me is that you're building this concept of building a hearth to contain a fire is a visceral one. You can imagine that. If you've ever gone camping, you build a little, you get some rocks and you build a place to build a fire. If you're going to build a house and you want a fireplace, you have to insulate the house from the fire. And so you're building this metaphorical space in your heart, in your essence, in your soul, so that you can contain this great energy.
Right. So you need to build the fireplace, and then you need to know how to invoke the fire.
Right.
Yeah. Back to the cave and banging the rocks together.
That's right.
Or rubbing the sticks together.
Yeah.
No, there is a way of calling in the fire when it's time.
Right.
When you've built the fireplace.
Right, because you don't want to be playing with fire without proper
that
training.
is the big thing. Yeah. Don't play with fire. We work with fire. We don't play with fire. That's the rule of magic.
And that's what this whole concept of when you're ready. Like the idea is that you are not put through this before you're ready. So you're preparing yourself for this. Over time.
Well, we say when we're ready.
Right.
The soul says, right, let's turn up the volume. Now we're ready to do that. Right, now you've got a little bit more ground under your feet, so let's turn up the heat.
All right.
So let's take the next paragraph from the Tibetan. The dweller on the threshold is oft regarded as a disaster, a horror to be avoided, and as a final and culminating evil. I would here remind you, nevertheless, that the dweller is, quote, one who stands before the gate of God, unquote. One who stands before the gate of God, who dwells in the shadow of the portal of initiation and who faces the angel of the presence open-eyed, as the ancient scriptures call it, open-eyed. The dweller can be defined as the sum total of the forces of the lower nature as expressed in the personality prior to illumination, to inspiration, and to initiation. Because after these things, after illumination, after inspiration, after initiation, the light in the shadow has been released. The light within matter has been released. As we said, matter occultly is called black light. So the black light of ignorance of our own being is realized and revealed and released as the light of knowing, the light of being, and we stand in a new sphere of awareness. And therefore we have the keys to the kingdom. We've got the frequency key. As we said, everything's controlled by cipher locks, which are really coded, frequency coded.
Yeah. The power of sound.
Absolutely. So, carrying on, the personality per se is, at this stage, exceedingly potent, and the dweller embodies all the psychic and mental forces which, down the ages, have been unfolded in man and nurtured with care. It can be looked upon as the potency of the threefold material form prior to its conscious cooperation and dedication to the life of the soul and to the service of the hierarchy of God and of humanity. So if you like, the dweller on the threshold is the last stand of the separate personality.
Right. I like that. That's a great image. Yeah.
I mean, it's the death dance. It's the last stand of
of the last stand of illusion, the last wiping away of the veil.
Exactly. So what dies? The not self. What's revealed? The self.
Yeah. The true revelation. Yeah.
The true apocalypse. So, just to complete this paragraph, the dweller on the threshold is all that man is apart from the higher spiritual self. It is the third aspect of divinity as expressed in and through the human mechanism. This third aspect must be eventually subordinated to the second aspect, the soul. So this gets a little technical. What is the third aspect? Well, the third ray is the ray of intelligent activity. So the third aspect is bringing it into form. So we're not focused on the form. The second aspect is the soul, is love. It's love, wisdom. So in the end, it's love, but then love calls forth new forms.
Yeah, it sure does.
And that's new wine in new bottles.
Yeah.
So there's so much more to this. We can carry on a little because it goes deeper, and then it touches on the tests of Scorpio, which I think we should get into. So in the next paragraph, the Tibetan sort of recaps. And so let me read it through, just so we have the imprint of his words. Memory is not simply just a faculty of the mind, as is so often supposed, but it is essentially a creative power. It is basically an aspect of thought and, coupled with imagination, is a creative agent, because thoughts are things, as well you know. From ancient recesses of the memory, from a deeply rooted past which is definitely recalled, and from the racial and individual subconscious or founded and established thought reservoirs and desires inherited and inherent, there emerges from individual past lives and experience that which is the sum total of all instinctual tendencies, of all inherited glamours, and of all phases of wrong mental attitudes. To these, as they constitute a blended whole, we give the name of the dweller on the threshold.
Wow.
The dweller is the sum total of all the personality characteristics which have remained unconquered and unsubdued, and which must be finally overcome before initiation can be taken. So this is basically a great wrap-up of what we've been talking about. And maybe it's useful just to say again how we hold this word initiation. Initiation isn't some sort of great gold star you're given for being good in class. It isn't some reward. Initiation is referred to as an enhanced capacity to carry out the will of God.
Right.
It simply means, hey, you can do more work. You can participate more fully in life.
Yeah. You have more capacity.
You have more capacity. That's absolutely it, Joey. It's capacity building so that the fullness of the one life can show up in us to greater and greater measures of expression.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit more here before we dive into the tests of Scorpio.
All right.
Each life sees some progress made, some personality defects straightened out, and some real advance affected. But the unconquered residue and the ancient liabilities are numerous and excessively potent. And when the soul contact is adequately established, there eventuates a life wherein the highly developed and powerful personality becomes in itself the dweller on the threshold. Basically, it's saying, this time around on stage, we get to act out. We don't just meet the dweller, we act it out.
Right.
Until we confront who? Ourselves. We come face to face with ourselves in the Hall of Mirrors. And then it carries on. Then the angel of the presence and the dweller stand face to face, and something must then be done. You know, it's just like standoff. You can't just stand there. Something has to happen when the two meet. Consciously meet. Remember, open-eyed. The dweller is open-eyed, and the angel of the present is present.
Yeah.
Something's got to give.
Yeah.
So eventually, it says, eventually the light of the personal self fades out and wanes in the blaze of glory which emanates from the angel. Then the greater glory obliterates the lesser. This is, however, only possible when the personality eagerly enters into this relation with the angel, recognizes itself as the dweller, and, as a disciple, begins the battle between the pairs of opposites and enters into the tests of Scorpio.
Mm.
Now, each year around this time, we sort of remind ourselves of the tests of Scorpio.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
But we don't just do it because it's an annual event. The reason we do that is because Scorpio rules the life of discipleship. Mm-hmm. It rules the life of humanity as a disciple. So what we are facing when we face the dweller are really the tests we find in Scorpio. So did you want to just do any recap or just observation before we dive into the tests of Scorpio?
Yeah, I think let's talk about the test of Scorpio and how that relates, because it's tied pretty closely to this, the overall idea. Like for me, it's always this concept of the phoenix rising from the ashes. You're burning off all this extra superfluous so that what's truly present can come through.
Right. So, as we said, Scorpio really rules the path of discipleship. So let's have a look at Scorpio through a different lens, through a lens that shows us the symbology. First of all, the personality, which would be the dweller aspect, is represented by the scorpion. So it represents the personality at war with itself and at war with others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I have Scorpio rising moon in Scorpio. I'm very well aware of what this feels like.
Yeah.
That I can be my own worst enemy.
Mm-hmm.
But the scorpion is the symbol of the personality. Mm-hmm. Then, when we start operating from the level of the soul, the scorpion transforms into the eagle. Mm-hmm. The eagle represents the soul because it infuses and informs the personality with this greater awareness. Mm-hmm. And once again, when we're looking at the United States of America, what is the image of the soul?
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's the eagle.
Yeah.
Now, there is a higher symbol beyond the soul, which is the spirit, the monadic fire. And that is represented by the dove. It's the highest expression when spirit descends and fills our whole being with the fire of synthesis, the fire of love. So the journey through Scorpio is from the scorpion to the eagle to the dove.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And that goes back to even in the Bible. I don't want to unpack this too much, but when the Master Jesus was called the Prince of Peace, mm-hmm. and the peace is the dove of peace.
Right.
And it means that when we operate at the highest level, we are a radiating embodiment of peace and love. When we are locked into our personality, we go about our lives as the scorpion, stinging ourselves and mm-hmm. others.
Yeah.
With no reason, right. No logical reason. Okay, let's move on. So Scorpio, in its lower expression, is called the agent of deception. And we know that each of these signs of the zodiac has a spiritual motto, but it also has a personality affirmation. And the affirmation of the personality in Scorpio is, let Maya flourish, let deception rule. It's like, bring it on.
That's right. Yeah.
Unleash the dogs of war.
Yeah.
So the current state of the world is a clear manifestation of the immature aspect of Scorpio. Let Maya flourish and let deception rule. Now, Scorpio in its higher aspect is called the light of liberation. because every sign of the zodiac has a quality of light associated with it. Scorpio is the light of liberation, which is really tied up with this whole battle. And the soul motto, or the spiritual motto of Scorpio is, warrior I am, and from the battle I emerge triumphant. So let's very briefly unpack the tests and the labors of Hercules, which are the tests of Scorpio. And for those of you listening to the podcast who are not familiar with the labors of Hercules, this Greek myth of Hercules having to face these 12 tests is really an illustration of the soul facing a test in every sign of the zodiac. Hercules is the soul, and the challenges in Scorpio aren't just one of 12, they also represent the ongoing tests of the life of a disciple or the life of humanity. So what is the test that Hercules has to face in Scorpio? Which really is, what is the test that the soul of humanity is facing right now? Hercules is asked to defeat the 9-headed Hydra, also known as the serpent of desire. And this 9-headed Hydra lives in the mud and the ooze of the lower worlds. It lives in the astral plane. And mud, it really is a mixture of water and earth. So it's a mixture of these elements, and we can get stuck in the mud. So it lives in the mud. And Scorpio provides the tests that allow us to achieve freedom from the prison of physical attachment, emotional control, and mental conditioning. These are the things that we have to liberate ourselves. So when we talk about the path of liberation, and the Buddhists talk about liberation, non-attachment to form, we're also talking about liberating ourselves from emotional conditioning, mental conditioning. So this 9-headed Hydra is very interesting because the 9 heads represent the 3 levels of the personality: physical, emotional, and mental. And each level has 3 tests. So let's break these down. And imagine along with us as you hear these, because you'll say, I resemble that. The 3 tests of the physical plane in Scorpio: sex, physical comfort, and money. This is not saying that it's bad. It's just saying that we are tested in the arena of sex, physical comfort, and money. Sex meaning, do we get trapped in this? Is pleasure becomes an addiction? Are we held fast by the gravitational pull of the sexual impulse? Physical comfort, as you named earlier, is the comfort stopping us from taking the next step? And money, because money is a crystallized form of energy, and what we're really looking for is power and energy, power. And we look for it in money. If we accumulate money and we become the richest person in the world, we think we have power. No, we have crystallized energy that represents power, but true power is the power of the soul to do good. Now, the 3 heads on the astral or the emotional plane that we have to face in Scorpio as humanity and in our individual lives are fear, hate, and ambition. So it goes back to fear. When we have fear, it stymies our creativity. It freezes us. When we have hate, it separates us. So I don't see you as my brother.
Right. That's right.
Ambition means I want to reach the top of the hill. I want to be king of the pile. I want to be the richest, the best in the world, which means putting self in front of everything. So living a self-centered life means, in the end, I, the part, want to be the whole, which means no other part can be on the top of the mountain with me. And this shows up politically as a dictator. It shows up as megalomania. It shows up as people who have created fortunes, having this belief that they have all the power and they are better and wiser than anyone else. It simply means they've accumulated more crystallized energy in the form of money. And ambition, then, is the desire to promote self. Once again, it's not bad. Many people have careers. I mean, I was in the corporate world for a while, and the career was always you trying to better yourself. But then you realize it's not ambition getting to be better than somebody else, or you measure your success by how many thousands of people you have reporting to you. Ambition changes in the spiritual life to striving. Now, the three heads remaining to be faced on the mental plane are pride, separateness, and cruelty. So pride is, once again, this self-aggrandizement of seeing oneself as it. Separateness is the illusion that, I'm not connected. And cruelty is, I don't know how to describe it, Joey, but cruelty is the opposite of loving kindness.
Yeah.
So if we look around, we see precisely the tests of Scorpio being played out right now in the world. So how does Hercules approach this test? How do we approach the tests of Scorpio in the world right now?
Right.
So we know that Hercules cannot mud wrestle with the Hydra because he would surely be pulled down and drown and suffocate in the mud. Hercules can't cut off a head because, according to the Greek myth, two more sprout in its place. Every time you cut off a head, two more sprout. The only way that you can overcome the Hydra is by kneeling first, which is an act of humility, where you go down on your knee. The only way to rise spiritually is by kneeling. And then when you kneel, you can grasp the Hydra, reach into the mud, grab this slippery serpent, and you lift it high up into the light of day. And when it's lifted into the light of day, it loses its power. When the dweller is embraced by the light of the angel of the presence, it loses its power.
Yeah.
This is the whole secret of it. The slippery serpent of desire cannot exist in the rarefied air of the Buddhic plane, because in the higher regions of our being, the lower desires no longer hold sway. I mean, that's, if you like, a short version of the test of Hercules, but it's what we're facing now. And I'd like to add one more thing, Joey.
Yes.
The reason we're facing this is because we're approaching the portal.
That's the important thing to remember.
So what's the portal that we're approaching collectively?
Yeah.
Now, the Tibetan says that we are approaching for the first time a collective initiation, where humanity as a whole is going to take this test. And the test is called the first initiation, which is proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that, according to the biblical quote, man cannot live by bread alone. That means we cannot be nourished solely by material things.
Right.
So we have to do what the Buddhists say is non-attachment to form, non-attachment to things, to feelings, and to thoughts. Not to not have them, but not to be attached to them. And it's said that the only way to release these sticky threads of attachment is to open the heart and for the presence of a greater love to enter our heart. And in Christian mystical terms, it's called, the Tibetan names this, when Christ is born within the cave of the human heart, when Christ consciousness, when this love of life, when this fire of love is born inside, that's when all the shadows disappear. So that's what we're facing at the moment. So are we gonna make it over the threshold? We can only make it over the threshold when we recognize that we are the dweller, when we recognize that we also are the angel, when the two meet at the threshold of the portal, and then when we understand these two are the creative tension that creates the higher path that we have to tread beyond it into the presence itself.
Yeah.
This is what lies ahead for us as humanity. And what's stopping us and standing and barring the way is all the unredeemed and accumulated stuff of our ancient selves. This is the big test, Joey.
It is. And it's pretty wild to watch us collectively go through this. Whether you realize it's happening or not. Once you start to think about this stuff, you can really see it. It's so clear.
Well, let me just put the seal on this with one quote from the Tibetan. Okay. He poses a question. Will the world Hercules, and the world Hercules is humanity, elevate the hydra of passion and hate, of greed and aggression, and of selfishness and ambition up into the region of the soul, or will it carry the whole matter down onto the physical plane with the inevitable corollary of world disaster, world war, and death? He's basically saying, hey, this is crunch time, guys.
Yeah.
We can either make it through, or we're gonna burn.
Yeah.
And it's up to us. Do we have the capacity?
That's a question.
So it's really, this call is all souls on deck, Joey. All of us around the planet, those of you listening to this podcast, ask yourself, what can I do to bring more light into the world at this time? What can I do to redeem those unloved, unaccepted parts of myself? What can I do to heal the trauma that still is locked in the cells of my being, that stops the light of the soul from shining through my every action, my every thought, my every feeling? I mean, that's really the daily task. So this isn't some sort of spiritual text that is devoid of reality, that is removed from daily life. We're being asked to live this, to make it real. As the ancient prayer of the Gayatri says, lead us from darkness into light, from the unreal to the real, and from death to immortality. Immortality is when we go through the gates and the portal of life. I don't know how else to say it, Joey. We have never, ever faced such a critical time of choice as a species. We faced it in Atlantis and we were found wanting. The plug was pulled and here we are again.
Yeah.
Take two.
Yeah, it's go time.
So,
and we see that in every aspect of around the world, of every conflict, of every situation where it seems our lesser angels are taking over. But it is, it's not to despair. It's to turn inward and focus on what you can do.
Right. Yeah, you don't give up in the face of the darkness.
No.
You understand the darkness is the unredeemed aspects of myself, yourself, our collective self. And we have not only an individual dharma and karma, we have a collective dharma and karma. Our dharma is our destiny as light-filled beings. Our karma is that which is the anchor holding us back. It's all the aspects of the past that are not allowing ourselves to be present. And we can only precipitate the promise of the future in the present when we're not captured by the past. And this is the liberation.
It's the processing of the past,
So, I mean, this is the second in this series of Ponder on This that we've done. This is like part 2 of the astral plane. So when you reflect on this past hour or so that we've been exploring, what stands out for you? What's your takeaway?
Well, for me, it's the concept that we inherit as a species, as a culture, we inherit this sort of karmic debt. These things that need to be revealed and processed, and then we have our own personal journey too. The things that we've gone through, and as you start to look at them, you start to see these correlations between how the idea there's nothing new under the sun. We're still trying to solve these same problems, but I think that we're starting to sort of peek out of the fog just a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think the important thing for that is, especially if you are called to, if you happen to find yourself listening to this podcast, you have been called to go down this journey and to work on this stuff. And And that's what we do. Like, I really want people not to despair, because like, that's one of the things that for me, when I've been on this journey, is it's important to remember that there's a reason why you're here. You've made it through everything to get to this point, and you're here to continue to do the work of releasing and processing, and also illuminating, like becoming that light for everyone else.
There was a wonderful Japanese saying that said, "It is a foolish farmer that gives up the day before the harvest."
Right.
We've come this far, Joey.
Exactly.
We've got a ways to go, and we've got to really rally our forces.
Yeah.
We have to overcome our own limitations. And our limitations are just our lack of capacity.
Yeah. And that's what we're building. That's the point of this whole process. Yeah. If you think about it, you can think about it in computation or mechanical terms. You know, you want to be able to process more apples, cherries. You want to be able to, move more units of energy, units of karma.
We want to transmit more particles of light from the soul into the temporal world, and to bring light into the darkness, to bring heaven on earth, to raise earth to heaven, whatever images that we want to draw upon. But I think the call is, let the light of the soul dispel the darkness that currently pervades the world. And that light lives in each one of us. That power lives in each one of us. And with that power comes the responsibility, our ability to respond to the call of the times. So may we be the light bringers that are needed at this time.
Absolutely. All right. Wow. Thank you, Michael. That was good.
Thanks,
I really appreciate that. And I really like to ponder on this series, and we'll come back to it.
Oh, I will keep going through, and we'll ponder on some other things. But it seems that we should start with the astral plane and the dweller, because that's where we are at the moment. This is not a spectator sport. We are immersed in this real-time psychodrama.
Yeah.
A divine improv theater happening right here and now in your own home.
Yes, that's right. Your own hearth. All right. Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, Joey.
All right.